In addition, I think I get extra time if I sit down.
Would the honourable member recognise that whilst the audit report did make those criticisms, they also said that at the end of the day there'd be a 2.5 return to 1 on this project? And doesn't the honourable member recognise the importance of that to future generations and their well-being?
Well, the honourable gentleman makes a nice try, but the cost of this project is going up on by a minute-by-minute basis, and so I doubt that that ratio is accurate even as I stand here today. But I also have to say that the Department and HS2 Limited have already failed on other basics. They've had engineering calculations that have been wrong, costs of alterations to Euston were inaccurate, and with the public failures of the West Coast Mainline franchise debacle, it must beg the question if the Department or HS2 has the leadership, capability or the competence to deliver the largest infrastructure project in the UK in living memory. But if it gets the green light, as I fear it will, by the numbers here today, I just want to make 2 particular points to my right honourable friend. The current consultation by HS2 Limited on the draft environmental statement, and I use that term loosely, whatever the failings are of the process, at the moment one thing is clear. The AONB, the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, something which belongs to everybody in this country, is going to be irreversibly damaged. And so my first request of the Secretary of State is, if this project does go ahead, can we have the best possible mitigation in the Chilterns in order to protect our precious and highly endangered environment to the utmost level? A fully bored tunnel under the whole of the AONB would offer that protection, and I urge the Secretary of State to adopt this option. My second request, I think he's answered partly because he accepted in his opening speech that he's going to look more seriously or perhaps even deliver the property bond. The compensation scheme to date has been totally inadequate, and the engagement of officials and ministers, often the dialogue of the deaf, quite frankly. And this bill does not include specific undertakings on compensation that would fulfil the Prime Minister's assurance to me that compensation would be timely and generous to those people adversely affected. So I would hope he would look at the property bond put forward by my constituent Hilary Wharf, who is to be commended for her work in this area, and that the system of compensation which comes in is rapid and fair and does not make my constituents feel that government is wriggling to avoid paying them a proper price for their properties. Mr. Speaker, as you know, there are several members of Parliament whose constituencies are affected by HS2 who are unable to speak today. So I just wanted to say a few words on behalf of my right honourable friend, the member for Aylesbury, who's worked tirelessly to put forward the interests of his constituents. He asked me to point out today that places like Wendover Dean and Hawkslade and Walton Court and areas of Aylesbury are amongst the worst affected areas of any along Phase 1 route. So I'd hope my right honourable friend would introduce better mitigation, and that request would fit in with my own request for a fully bored tunnel. I know you yourself, Mr. Speaker, have regularly communicated your constituents' overwhelming opposition to this project, and like me, you've received thousands of letters and have similar experiences of the failures of the Exceptional Hardship Fund to offer adequate compensation to constituents. And likewise, my right honourable friend in Beaconsfield is considerably worried about the Denham Viaduct and the Colne Valley site of special scientific interest. Mr. Speaker, why do we need a paving bill? There wasn't one for the Channel Tunnel rail link, there wasn't one for Crossrail, there wasn't one for the Olympics. I think we can continue to spend money as we have done already without this bill. But once this bill is passed, as it undoubtedly will be, the government will be able to claim that HS2 is backed by the will of Parliament. Quite frankly, all colleagues should be concerned about proceeding with this project. This bill is a blank cheque, handed over before Parliament is in full possession of the facts, and handed over to a department that is having a hard job convincing people it is actually fit for purpose. On this basis, and because this is the first time we have even had a vote on HS2, it is with a very heavy heart that I cannot support the government, and I hope that colleagues in the House today would support my reasoned amendment and vote against the bill. At this stage, I have no intention of calling votes on any other part of the proceedings, but I will on the amendment and on the second reading.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, HS2 will unleash havoc on Euston, Primrose Hill and Camden Town in my constituency. It will demolish the homes of around 500 people and blight the homes of at least another 1,000. One local park will disappear forever. Another will be a building site for 10 years or more. The project will prevent the much-needed reconstruction of Euston Station that was intended to provide around 1,000 new flats for local people. It's already delayed plans to rebuild a local convent school. The link to HS1 will subject Primrose Hill and Camden Town to large-scale engineering works, mainly above ground level. Local shops and restaurants will be put out of business. Quiet back streets are to become official routes for construction traffic, yet the compensation and mitigation regime intended for our area is inferior to what's been promised outside London, and that can't be right. When HS2 was given the go-ahead, we were told first that Phase 1 would cost £17 billion, second that it would be completed by 2026, and third that no one would suffer a significant loss. HS2 is backtracking on all three. For a start, as has been pointed out, £17 billion won't actually provide a working railway because it doesn't include the cost of the trains, estimated at £2 billion. It's going to be a sort of train-free zone. It doesn't include the cost of the works at Euston needed to allow the already overcrowded tube and local roads to cope with the additional passengers and traffic. That's probably another £2 billion. VAT at 20% would be around £3 billion. The original estimate for HS2 also included £1.4 billion for a spur to Heathrow. The spur has been dropped, but it's not at all clear where the £1.4 billion has gone. I give way to Right Honourable Lady.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Would he also agree that because we don't have the full environmental statement and it's only a draft, that we actually do not know what the full cost is going to be for any environmental mitigation that may be needed along the route of the line?
Yeah.
What the Right Honourable Lady says is absolutely right. Recently, HS2 have been forced to confess that they underestimated the cost of the works at Euston by no less than 40%. We're being asked to write a blank cheque for people who underestimate costs by 40%. On top of that, they now admit that they'll have to rebuild or strengthen cuttings, embankments and bridges on the North London line and the main line. Originally, they denied that this would be necessary, and so they didn't provide for this in the original costings. And I remind people that these costs are soaring while HS2 is still at a desk study stage. God knows what will happen when they actually get round to practical work on the site.
Honourable friend, just on that point, is he aware that the New Economics Foundation last week is the third independent evaluation of this project to say there was real doubt over its viability and what it would do for the northern cities?
Well, I can't possibly disagree with what my honourable friend has said. All I can say is that in theory, a million years ago, I got a degree in economics, and I've reached the stage where I think I can usually work out when somebody else is talking drivel, and when I listen to the government's cost estimates, I think I understand they're talking drivel. Does anybody in the House really believe the line will be completed by 2026? I was going to offer a bet against completion by 2026, but I suspect the final completion date will be so far in the future I'm unlikely to be around to collect my winnings. That brings me to the compensation and mitigation. At present, HS2 intend that people and businesses in our area should get lower compensation, lower standards of protection and inferior mitigation measures. There can be no excuse for this treatment of a settled residential and business community. Local council tenants, right to buy leaseholders, private tenants, leaseholders and owner-occupiers should be no worse off as a result of this project being carried out apparently in the national interest. They must be found new homes that meet their needs and without any detriment to the terms and conditions of their tenure. The same approach should apply to businesses. Restaurants and small shops in Drummond Street depend on the passing trade to the existing Euston station for as much as 70% of their business. But HS2 propose that for 10 years they should be cut off from Euston Station by a barrier which will be higher than the Berlin Wall. And what's worse is, as presently proposed, they would get no compensation at all. And I say to members opposite who always say they're speaking up on behalf of small businesses, if they don't do something to prevent this wickedness proceeding, then they'll be letting down some small businesses. And of course, the same non-compensation rules will apply in Camden Town. I believe that the government must reconsider this project. Is it really the best use of scarce £17 billion if we want to improve our creaking transport system? Even if it is, wouldn't the London terminus be better at Old Oak Common, which, unlike Euston, is on the Heathrow Express, will be on Crossrail, and where it would be welcomed, and where studies show that if people get off at Crossrail, only 4% of the stations on the London Underground would take longer to reach than if people go into Euston. And the ones that would take longer to reach are Euston Square, Regent's Park, Mornington Crescent, King's Cross, St Pancras. So there's no disadvantage, and if this goes ahead, most sensible travellers will get off at Old Oak Common anyway, whatever anybody says. Yeah. So finally, I have to say, if it is decided to go ahead, then the government must introduce, and I think there's agreement, I hope there'll be agreement across the chamber, that there should be a special made-to-measure compensation and mitigation scheme for the whole length of HS2 and all the residents and businesses affected by it, and it should be as generous as the Secretary of State promised. I don't doubt the integrity of the Secretary of State. So I also have to say this. In all the years I've dealt with public and private bodies, I have never come across an outfit as stupid and incompetent and incapable of delivering letters even as the people presently running HS2. And if I was in favour of this project, I'd get somebody else to do it.
Order. Alan Reid.